Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex stories, distill the core insights, and hopefully turn information into understanding for you. Today, we're embarking on a pretty intense deep dive into a case that, well, it captured national attention and frankly still baffles a lot of us: the brutal 2022 University of Idaho murders. We've compiled a comprehensive stack of source material, detailed investigative reports, court documents, some really chilling autopsy findings, and insights from law enforcement and forensic experts. Our mission today is to unpack the critical timeline of that night, the evidence that started accumulating and led to an arrest, and just the perplexing, deeply unsettling parts of this whole tragic event. We'll guide you through every significant turn in the search for justice and, well, maybe some kind of understanding.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cases. Even with conviction, a clear legal resolution, it just leaves so many fundamental questions hanging in the air, especially that biggest one: why? The sources we've looked at really lay bare the meticulous, painstaking work investigators put in, but they also show that deep human need for answers that sometimes, even justice can't fully provide. We see the system work technically, but those deeper psychological questions, they often just remain.
That's such a vital point, and definitely something we'll keep coming back to. To really get a handle on this story, we have to start right at the beginning, set the scene. Our story unfolds in Moscow, Idaho. It's a rural college town nestled in those rolling hills of the Pulaus region. And this isn't a place that's used to violent crime, not at all. In fact, the last murder there before this horrific event in November 2022 was way back in 2015. So it's the kind of quiet, almost idyllic community where students generally feel safe, families settle down, and violent crime feels like something that happens somewhere else, far away. That peaceful reality was just shattered on November 13th, 2022.
Absolutely. And that sense of a tight-knit, secure community being so abruptly and violently ruptured, that's really what made this case hit so hard, not just in Idaho, but across the whole country. It really underscores the profound shockwaves this sent through Moscow and beyond. It challenged that very perception of safety in small-town America.
And the absolute epicenter of that tragedy was a specific place: the King Road residence. This wasn't just any house. It was a 3-story, 6-bedroom off-campus rental. Pretty typical college house setup built into a hillside. Now, this unique construction meant it had 2 different entrances, one on the first floor and another one up on the second floor. On the third floor, you had the bedrooms of Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan. Kaylee had technically moved out already, but she was back visiting, staying with Madison that night, like close friends do. The second floor had the main common areas like the kitchen and also the bedrooms of Xana Kernodle and one of the surviving roommates. Xana's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was staying over in her room that night. And then down on the first floor, the other surviving roommate had their bedroom. So you can kind of picture it: a full house, vibrant with college life, just like so many shared student homes everywhere.
And that layout, the physical structure of the house, it's actually quite critical to understanding the events of that night. And definitely are crucial for the investigators trying to piece together the timeline: the multiple floors, the 2 entrances. While common for a hillside build, it meant there were these distinct zones of activity and potential points of entry and exit. This sort of compartmentalization would end up playing a pretty significant role in how the perpetrator moved through the home and then consequently how the tragedy unfolded and was eventually discovered. It's more than just an architectural detail, it's really a forensic one.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the victims themselves, they were just incredibly vibrant young people, exactly the kind of students you'd expect to find at a college town. Ethan Chapin, just 20 years old, a sophomore from Mount Vernon, Washington. He was studying recreation sport and tourism management, active in the Sigma Chi fraternity. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, a senior from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, studying general studies, part of the Alpha Phi sorority. Then there was Xana Kernodle, 20, a junior from Avondale, Arizona, majoring in marketing, and a Pi Beta Phi sorority member. And Madison Mogan, 21, also from Coeur d'Alene, like Kaylee, a senior in marketing, and a Pi Beta Phi sister with Xana. You can just picture them, right? Living, learning, making plans for their futures, just like so many young people at that really exciting stage of life, full of potential.
Definitely. And, from a broader perspective, how relatable these victims were. It just amplified the tragedy's impact hugely on the community, on the wider public. It wasn't just a statistic. It was 4 promising lives, 4 futures just cut short. This deep personal connection the community felt made the shock and fear really palpable. For so many people, it felt like it could have been their own kids, their own friends.
It makes it incredibly personal, yeah. Even for those of us just learning about it now.
Yeah.
And speaking of the house, there were also 2 surviving roommates present that night: Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funke. Their presence in the house during the events and what they did afterwards, That would become a really pivotal and frankly chilling part of the story. It shaped the initial investigation and how we understand the timeline.
Their experience, as we'll get into, is just deeply unsettling. It's really a testament to the random, terrifying nature of what happened and the sheer psychological trauma of encountering something like that.
Okay, so let's now plunge into the chilling events of that night, November 13th, 2022. The timeline of their last known activities has been meticulously pieced together by investigators. By 2:00 a.m., all 5 roommates, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, Dylan, and Bethany, plus Ethan Chapin, were accounted for. They were all back in the King Road house. Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle had gotten back from a Sigma Chi fraternity party around 1:45 a.m. Meanwhile, Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves had been out downtown. They went to a sports bar, then stopped at a food truck, and they arrived home just moments later at 1:56 a.m.
So that brief window, just between 1:45 a.m. and 2:00 a.m., that's when everyone was confirmed back at the house, unknowingly setting the stage for the horror that was about to unfold. It gives us that critical baseline for the timeline.
Right. Now, here's a fascinating detail that came out of their phone records, and it was initially pretty confusing. Between 2:26 a.m. and 2:52 a.m., Kaylee Goncalves' phone made 7 unanswered calls to her former longtime boyfriend. Then, immediately after that, between roughly 2:44 a.m. and 2:52 a.m., Madison Mogan's phone made 3 unanswered calls to the exact same person. Authorities naturally cast a very wide net early on, so they thoroughly looked into this individual, but ultimately they cleared him of any involvement.
Yeah, and the initial focus on those calls really highlights how investigators have to chase down every single possible lead, no matter how tenuous it might seem at first. It's a crucial part of that early process, ruling out immediate connections, getting rid of red herrings, making sure they don't miss something vital. It speaks to how comprehensive those initial stages have to be.
Okay, so based on all the evidence they gathered later, detectives now believe the actual violent acts, the murders themselves, happened between 4:00 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. That's a really tight, chilling window, 25 minutes. And Xana Kernodle, one of the victims, was actually confirmed to be awake during this critical time. The investigation revealed she got a DoorDash food order delivered around 4:00 a.m. And she was even using the TikTok app on her phone at 4:12 a.m., which implies, a conscious, active presence just minutes before the attack started.
That detail about Xana being awake is incredibly significant. It means at least one of the victims was aware of the killer's presence. That adds a whole other layer of terror, and as we'll discuss with the injuries, it sheds light on the nature of her wounds, suggesting a struggle took place. It's also one of the very last confirmed activities before everything went dark in that house.
Right. And here's where the story becomes truly chilling. This is where we get critical insight into what happened from Dylan Mortenson's account, one of the surviving roommates. She told investigators she was woken up by a noise from the 3rd floor. Initially, she just thought it was Kaylee playing with her dog Murphy. Apparently, that was pretty common in that active house. But then, a more alarming sound. She heard what she thought was a roommate saying, "There's someone here." Now, investigators later came to suspect this voice might have actually been Xana, not Kaylee. Dylan then cautiously looked out her door, didn't see anything right away. But moments later, she heard crying, coming from the direction of Xana's room. And then an unfamiliar male voice. Distinct. Unsettling, saying something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you."
Wow, the layers of sound there. The progression of what she heard, it paints such a terrifying, granular picture of how things were unfolding. It really speaks to the stealth and maybe the chilling composure of the perpetrator in those first moments. Moving through the house, even speaking to Veldon while another resident was just feet away, completely unaware of the full horror.
And security cameras nearby actually corroborate some of this. They picked up whimpering sounds, a loud thud, and a dog barking, all starting around 4:17 a.m. This is happening at the same time. Dylan is hearing these disturbing things from inside the house. She opened her door a 3rd time, and that's when she saw him. A figure dressed entirely in black clothing, with a mask covering his mouth and nose, walking past her. She didn't recognize him at all. He then went out through a sliding glass door in the kitchen area on the 2nd floor. Dylan described standing there in just a profound frozen shock phase for a while before she could even react. Eventually, she retreated and locked herself back in her room.
That frozen shock phase, it's a known physiological response, a primal reaction to extreme trauma, often called fight, flight, or freeze. When faced with an overwhelming threat, the brain can essentially short-circuit, preventing action. It's involuntary. And this detail lent immense credibility to Dylan's account. It explains that delay in her reaction and why investigators didn't see it as suspicious. They understood it was a protective mechanism, not complicity. Her survival in that moment. It likely came down to the killer's singular focus on the other victims and her body's natural, though terrifying, protective shutdown.
Okay, so after this terrifying encounter, around 4:26 a.m., Dylan Mortensen finally went downstairs to find the other surviving roommate, Bethany Funke. On her way, she saw Xana Kernodle lying on her bedroom floor. Dylan later told police that at that moment she thought Xana might have just been intoxicated, passed out maybe, which, given the context of a college party house and how disorienting everything must have been, seems understandable at the time.
Right. That misinterpretation of Xana's state, while incredibly tragic looking back, is totally understandable given the circumstances. It really speaks to the fog of trauma and just the typical atmosphere of a college home where, intoxication isn't unusual. This also helps explain that significant delay before the 911 call was made because the true horror wasn't immediately grasped.
So Dylan and Bethany then locked themselves in a bedroom. And for several hours, they actually tried to contact their other housemates, still unaware of the full horror that had unfolded just upstairs and down the hall. It wasn't until 11:58 a.m., over 7 hours after the attacks likely occurred, that a 911 call was finally made. It came from Bethany Funk's phone, requesting aid for an unconscious person. Friends had actually been called over to the house first, before that 911 call was placed. When police arrived, the door to the house was open. No sign of forced entry, no damage. Nothing appeared to be missing. The 2 surviving roommates and some other friends were there. All 4 victims were tragically pronounced deceased right around noon. They were found in their beds. They weren't gagged or restrained. And Kaylee's dog, Murphy, was found unharmed on the 3rd floor.
That lengthy delay in the 911 call, though it definitely raised eyebrows for some people looking from the outside, wasn't seen as suspicious by the investigators, precisely because of the trauma, the confusion the surviving roommates experienced, and the fact they brought friends over first before realizing the true gravity of it all. It just highlights how confusing and disorienting discovering a scene like that must be, and the lack of forced entry. That also suggested the killer either just walked through an unlocked door or maybe even had some prior knowledge of the house itself.
Okay, let's turn now to the truly gruesome autopsy findings and the insights investigators pulled from the crime scene itself. Autopsies were done over in Spokane, Washington, and they provided absolutely vital clues. The investigation revealed all 4 victims were fatally stabbed multiple times. The weapon was described as a large fixed blade knife, or possibly very similar ones. The fatal wounds were primarily to the chest and upper body area. It was also determined that at least one victim, Xana, had defensive stab wounds. That indicates she actively tried to fend off the attacker, confirming she was awake and fighting for her life. The victims were likely attacked while they were asleep in bed. There were no signs of sexual assault. All 4 deaths were tragically ruled homicide by stabbing, and crucially, no weapon was ever recovered at the scene.
The consistent mention of a large fixed blade knife points to a specific type of weapon, probably something designed for combat or hunting, not just a typical kitchen knife. And the sheer number of wounds on some victims, even those likely attacked while sleeping, indicates an incredibly violent, sustained attack, not just a quick, single blow. The absence of the weapon is also really significant. It suggests a deliberate effort by the perpetrator to get rid of crucial forensic evidence.
This is where the details become just truly disturbing, and they offer critical insights into the nature of the attack itself. Let's look at the specific injuries and patterns, because they actually vary quite a bit between the victims. Xana Kernodle. She had over 50 stab wounds, and most of hers were indeed defensive, indicating just a fierce, desperate fight for her life. Her fatal injuries included lacerations to her right lung and heart. This really reinforces that idea that she was awake, she was aware, she confronted her attacker.
Yeah, the nature and just the sheer quantity of Xana's wounds are a critical piece of this puzzle. They show active resistance, a desperate struggle. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, it strongly corroborates Dylan's account of hearing Xana potentially say, "Someone's here," hearing crying from her room. And it explains why her room was such an intensely violent scene. It tells us she put up a formidable fight that likely alarmed the perpetrator, maybe caused him to expend significant effort there.
And then there's Kaylee Goncalves. She suffered over 20, some reports even say 30 or more stab wounds. Her injuries included not only sharp force trauma, but also what were described as stick steel and blunt force injuries. Her fatal lacerations were to her left lung and liver. She also had subdural bleeds and a stab wound behind her clavicle that severed a major vein and artery. But here's the detail that was just truly shocking. Her face was described by the initial responding officer as completely disfigured and essentially unrecognizable. This raises huge questions. Was a second weapon used on her? Or was there just extreme blunt force applied? It suggests a different, maybe more personal or rage-fueled aspect to her attack compared to the others.
That's fascinating, isn't it? The distinct difference in Kaylee's injuries compared to Xana, Madison, and Ethan. Subdural bleeds, for instance, they signify severe blunt force trauma to the head. That suggests a level of violence beyond just the knife wounds, the disfigurement, the sheer number of stab wounds, plus the blunt force. It suggests a level of maybe personal rage or just a prolonged frenzied assault that sets her apart. This kind of variation in a single incident, it often prompts profilers to wonder, were certain victims primary targets? Did the killer's emotional state escalate during the event? Or maybe Kaylee was simply the last victim facing the full brunt of the killer's frenzy before he fled. Lots of possibilities there.
Okay, what about Madison Mogen? She was in the same bed as Kaylee.
Madison Mogen sustained fatal lacerations to her left lung and liver, but critically, her injuries were described as only sharp force injuries. So that contrasts sharply with Kaylee's wounds. It implies maybe a swifter, more precise attack in her case, or at least a different kind of violence without that additional blunt force seen with Kaylee.
And Ethan Chapin, Xana's boyfriend who was in her room.
Ethan Chapin's fatal injury was a single stab wound under his left clavicle. It severed his jugular vein and subclavian artery. His injuries were also described as only sharp force injuries, similar to Madison. That single fatal wound, while obviously still tragic and immediately incapacitating, distinguishes his attack from the frenzied multiple wound nature we saw with Xana and especially Kaylee. It suggests maybe a targeted swift strike.
Experts who reviewed these findings noted the, quote, intentionality and force, and the methodical approach that seemed evident in the wounds. The sheer number of stab wounds, especially Xana's 50+, suggests just intense rage or a really sustained attack. There's also been so much discussion about the personal nature typically associated with knife attacks. They're often seen as crimes of passion or personal vendetta. They require close proximity, a high degree of intent. What's so baffling here, what truly haunts this case, is the complete lack of any apparent personal connection between the perpetrator and the victims. The initial responding officer's description of Kaylee's injuries was particularly chilling. He said he was unable to comprehend exactly what he was looking at, just suggests a scene of unimaginable brutality. And the scene itself showed significant evidence of blood cast off and arterial spray, further indicating the extreme violence of the attack.
Yeah, and this raises that profound question about motive, precisely because of the typically personal nature of knife attacks. When attacks are this intimate, this brutal, you usually find a clear connection to the victims. The absence of that here is a deep, deep mystery. It forces us to consider a level of depravity that just defies our conventional understanding of criminal behavior. You mentioned blood cast-off that tells investigators things like the direction and force of blows, essentially mapping the attack, showing the killer's movements in the room. Arterial spray indicates a major artery was hit, confirming the immediate, life-ending nature of some wounds. These forensic details, they paint a vivid, though incredibly disturbing, picture of the violence.
Other observations from the crime scene were also crucial early on. Large footprints, estimated to be maybe a size 13.5 or 14 inches, were seen in the snow near that rear slider door, leading both to and from the house. And a discarded black backpack was found in the backyard. These seem like small details, but they become really vital as the investigation moves forward.
Exactly. These seemingly subtle details, the footprints, the backpack, they're critical early forensic clues. They start to paint a picture of the perpetrator's physical characteristics, their movements, maybe even their appearance. They provide specific leads for investigators to follow, like breadcrumbs in a very dark forest, as they say.
The investigation itself was just a truly massive effort. But it was also, as often happens in these huge high-profile cases, kind of marred by leads that went nowhere, by rampant misinformation online, and just by a public absolutely desperate for answers that weren't coming fast enough. The Moscow Police Department, the MPD, they led the investigation initially, but they were very quickly backed up by the Idaho State Police, ISP, and the FBI. They pooled resources, totaling nearly 130 law enforcement members working on this.
And that level of multi-agency cooperation is absolutely standard for cases like this, high-profile, complex, especially when a smaller town police department faces a quadruple homicide, something way beyond their normal scope. It pools resources, expertise, technology, all essential for a thorough and hopefully efficient investigation.
The community response was immediate, just overwhelming grief. The university canceled classes initially, then scheduled a vigil, trying to provide a space for people to come together. But then came the confusion and, frankly, some missteps in public messaging. Initial police statements suggested there was no risk to the community, which understandably caused a massive outcry when that later changed, weeks later, to cannot say that there is no threat. That shift caused huge fear and anxiety. It led to this early Thanksgiving exodus, students and residents just leaving Moscow because they didn't feel safe anymore in their once peaceful town.
Yeah, that messaging misstep. I mean, maybe it was well-intentioned initially, trying to prevent immediate panic, but it ultimately backfired. It created this vacuum that was just instantly filled with fear, distrust, and rampant speculation. It really underscores the delicate balance law enforcement has to strike with public communication during these ongoing, evolving investigations. Transparency is key, absolutely, but so is not causing undue alarm. It's a real tightrope walk.
And speaking of speculation, rampant rumors and misinformation just spread like wildfire, fueled by online internet sleuths, TikTokers, self-proclaimed psychics, you name it. Everything from like cartel involvement to specific local residents being implicated was being thrown around online. The police openly criticized these distractions. They warned against harassment and basically said that tracking down all these rumors was a huge distraction that compromised the real investigation, diverting valuable resources from actual leads.
Oh, absolutely. The impact of unchecked social media and high-profile cases like this is a major, major challenge for law enforcement now. Misinformation doesn't just mislead the public, it actively drains investigative resources. Every tip, no matter how outlandish it seems, has to be vetted. It's just a constant battle for agencies to manage the narrative and stay focused amid this storm of online speculation.
Some of the initial leads included apparently hundreds of pieces of information about a potential stalker targeting Kaylee Goncalves. But these tips were ultimately unverified, and they later faded from relevance in the case against the person eventually arrested. The surviving roommates and the friends who were present at the house were also quickly cleared of any involvement after intense scrutiny, which is just standard procedure in these situations.
Right, and that's a classic example of how early leads, even if they seem compelling at first, often just don't pan out. Investigators have to follow every single thread, no matter how remote it seems, just to ensure no stone is left unturned. But it's really a testament to their rigorous process that they were able to quickly rule out those individuals and focus their efforts elsewhere as more substantive evidence started to emerge.
Okay, here's where the investigation truly turned a corner. This led to the big breakthrough, the pivotal white Hyundai Elantra. On December 7th, weeks after the murders, police announced they were actively searching for a white Hyundai Elantra, specifically a 2011 to 2013 model. They said one was seen near the crime scene during those early morning hours. Surveillance footage was absolutely key here. It captured a white or light-colored Elantra making multiple passes near the residence between 3:29 a.m. and 4:20 a.m., and then was seen speeding away right at 4:20 a.m. This became a critical piece of evidence that really focused the entire investigation. By December 15th, police were specifically searching records for about 22,000 such vehicles across the region.
That vehicle? It became the needle in the haystack they desperately needed. The surveillance footage showing its repeated presence and then that rapid departure right around the estimated time of the events strongly suggested a direct connection to the crime. Identifying it allowed investigators to narrow their search down considerably. They went from this broad general inquiry to a very specific make and model, and the sheer volume of vehicles they had to sift through 22,000 that just highlights the meticulous, often tedious work involved in modern policing, using databases, surveillance footage, just piecing together a massive puzzle.
So who was the man behind the wheel of that Elantra? Bryan Christopher Kohberger, 28 years old at the time. And what's truly striking, maybe ironic, is that he was a PhD student in criminal justice and criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, which is, a college town right next door to Moscow, just across the border. The irony here is just profound. He'd previously been a teaching assistant, reportedly involved with the Pullman Police Department in some capacity, and had even apparently considered becoming a police officer himself. His vehicle, a white Elantra, was actually a later model year than the initial police description, but it still matched the general type they were desperately looking for.
Yeah, the irony of a criminology PhD student becoming the prime suspect in such a heinous crime, it's incredibly striking. It immediately makes you wonder if his academic interests were somehow intertwined with his actions. Sources we reviewed indicated this dual interest could point to a kind of dangerous narcissism, where his academic understanding maybe fueled this perverse desire to commit the perfect crime and evade capture, viewing the investigation as some kind of twisted intellectual challenge, wanting to understand the system, perhaps, only to exploit its vulnerabilities. That's one theory floated.
The digital trail leading to Kohberger was extensive and ultimately pretty definitive. Let's start with the cell phone data. Investigators discovered his phone had pinged in the vicinity of the King Road home at least 12 times before November 13th, 2022. mostly in the late evening and early morning hours. This implies a clear pattern of, well, reconnaissance or surveillance in the weeks leading up to the murders.
Right. A ping just means the phone connected to a cell tower, even if it wasn't being used for a call or data. But the repeated pings right in the victim's neighborhood, especially late at night, strongly suggest active reconnaissance, not just someone randomly passing through. This kind of data provides powerful evidence of premeditation and a deliberate targeting of that specific location.
Then, on the actual night of the murders, November 13th, his phone actually stopped connecting to the network over in Pullman around 2:47 a.m. It didn't reconnect until around 4:48 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, which is south of Moscow, down near U.S. Highway 95. This is absolutely crucial because it indicates his phone was likely deliberately turned off or maybe put into airplane mode during that critical window when the crimes occurred. That would mask his movements, prevent digital tracking. And interestingly, his phone also connected to a cell tower near the victim's residence around 9:00 a.m. that same morning, hours after the crimes were committed.
That phone data is just incredibly damning. Deliberately turning off the phone or putting it in airplane mode, that's a common tactic perpetrators use to try and avoid digital tracking while committing a crime. It's almost certainly not accidental. And its reappearance hours later near the crime scene, that could suggest a return to the area, maybe out of curiosity, or even to, observe the aftermath. It points to a calculated effort to evade detection.
Social media also played a role in connecting some dots, though maybe not directly. An account believed to belong to Kohberger sent Instagram messages to one of the female victims back in late October. They went unanswered. And his now deleted Instagram account apparently followed Mogan, Goncalves, and Kernodle. Now, there are conflicting reports about whether any actual direct back-and-forth connection was ever found between Kohberger and the victims beyond these digital follows and that one unanswered message. But the digital following itself is a notable detail. We also learned he had apparently eaten at the Mad Greek restaurant where Mogan and Kernodle both worked.
Yeah, while a direct reciprocal connection might not have been established in the way we normally think of it, the social media following, the restaurant visits, it certainly suggests an awareness, maybe even a fixation, on these specific individuals, even if it wasn't reciprocated. This could definitely point towards a level of stalking or target selection, observing from a distance rather than a direct personal relationship. It fits a pattern of someone watching, gathering information, not necessarily interacting.
Then we have the purchases he made. Investigators discovered he had bought a K-bar knife, a sheet for it, and a sharpener on Amazon about 8 months before the killings. He also bought a black balaclava mask back in January 2022. Strikingly similar to the mask Dylan Mortensen described seeing that night.
The timing of those purchases, months in advance, strongly supports the idea of premeditation. The Ka-bar knife, for instance, that's a known combat or utility knife, often associated with military or survival contexts, not your typical kitchen utensil. Buying that, along with a sheath and sharpener, it paints a chilling picture of meticulous, planned preparation. And then you couple that with the balaclava. It aligns directly with the witness description and the type of weapon likely used. It strengthens the case against him significantly by showing intent and planning.
And finally, the real breakthrough moment, the aha moment that truly changed the whole trajectory of the investigation. Forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG DNA, from a tiny touch sample found on the knife sheath that was left behind at the crime scene was used to identify Bryan Kohberger as a potential suspect through FGG. That ultimately led investigators right to him.
This is where modern forensics just sourced. It truly shines. It's transforming cold cases. FGG is such a game changer. It takes even a tiny touched DNA sample, maybe just a few skin cells, and uploads the profile to public genetic databases, like the ones people use for ancestry research. It then identifies distant relatives, allowing investigators to meticulously build back a family tree and trace it down to a potential suspect. So that single-touch DNA sample, seemingly insignificant on its own, became the absolute key that unlocked the entire investigation. It's a method that's cracked dozens of previously unsolvable cases just in recent years. An incredible tool for justice.
So, with Kohberger identified as the prime suspect, the pursuit began. He drove his white Elantra cross-country from Washington State all the way to the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania for the holidays, with his father actually in the car.
Yeah.
During this trip, he was pulled over twice by Indiana State Police for tailgating on Interstate 70. Interestingly, the FBI later denied directing these stops, which implies the local officers were likely unaware of his suspect status at that exact moment.
Right, the sort of casual nature of those traffic stops, with local cops unknowingly pulling over a quadruple murder suspect. It adds this really bizarre layer to the whole narrative. It suggests the FBI and other federal agencies were already tracking him, maintaining surveillance, but hadn't yet brought local law enforcement into the arrest plan. Possibly to gather more intelligence before they made their move. It just shows how closely they were watching him, even before the formal arrest.
Investigators tracked and surveilled him for days in Pennsylvania before they finally moved in, and they observed some incredibly telling behaviors during that time. He was seen meticulously cleaning his car, and even more suspiciously, wearing surgical gloves outside his family's home, even when just doing things like taking out the trash.
That behavior observed during surveillance, the meticulous car cleaning, wearing surgical gloves, those are classic textbook signs of someone trying to remove or avoid leaving forensic evidence. It's a calculated effort to conceal. It suggests a strong awareness of investigative techniques and a clear intent to destroy any remaining proof of his actions, which, of course, strongly suggests consciousness of guilt.
On December 30th, 2022, Kohberger was arrested in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. After this period of intense surveillance, he was subsequently charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. That felony burglary charge is specifically for breaking into a home with the intent to commit a felony once inside, which is a critical legal distinction.
Yeah, that burglary charge is important. It establishes the intent to commit a crime upon entry, which is a key element in proving the severity and the premeditation of his actions. It's not just about what happened inside, but the intent he carried when he entered the house.
Then came the interrogation, also recorded on video at the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks in Stroudsburg that same day, December 30th. The initial interaction was, well, quite bizarre. When Detective Payne identified himself, Kohberger actually told him, "You do look familiar." Apparently, Payne had been involved in some of the news coverage of the case.
Wow, that immediately hints at Kohberger's close, maybe even obsessive attention to the case, even before he was arrested. It suggests he was actively following the investigation and watching the news reports, which, for a criminal justice student accused of these crimes, is a deeply chilling detail. It points to a possible fascination with his own crime and its aftermath.
The detectives used an extensive small talk strategy during the interrogation. They engaged him in conversation about his education, his PhD work in criminal justice and criminology at WSU, his previous studies, his move out to Washington, his travels, even things like the beauty of nature and its relation to a higher power. This wasn't just friendly chatter, it was a deliberate psychological tactic. A classic interrogation technique designed to calm him down, build some rapport, gather baseline behavioral information, and hopefully encourage him to maybe leak information or reveal aspects of his personality or knowledge he might otherwise try to hide.
Exactly. It's a nuanced psychological chess match. By building rapport and normalizing the conversation, detectives aim to lower the suspect's guard, make them more likely to reveal details inadvertently. It's a subtle way of extracting information without direct accusation. Those casual questions can elicit really revealing responses as the suspect tries to figure out what the police already know.
And he did leak some information. Kohberger himself actually brought up the University of Idaho and other Idaho universities. He started asking questions about them, despite claiming he didn't really know much about Idaho or Washington. He even stated he watched the news and was aware of a homicide because of a WSU alert that went out.
That leaking behavior is just classic for individuals who struggle to keep information contained, especially those maybe with a high degree of narcissism or compulsive need for control. He wanted to know what they knew. And in doing so, he inadvertently revealed his own deep awareness and interest in the case, despite trying to feign ignorance. It suggests this strong internal conflict trying to maintain his facade while satisfying his own curiosity or ego.
What's fascinating here is that Kohberger eventually stated he would need a lawyer, invoking his constitutional right. However, he then immediately re-engaged with the detectives. He started asking where his parents and his dog were and asked what questions we would have for him. This back and forth, this leaking behavior, apparently is common for individuals who struggle to keep things inside and want to know what the police know. Or maybe, disturbingly, are even proud of their actions and want to tell their story.
It's a common psychological battle you see in interrogations. The desire to control the narrative, to understand what evidence the police have, or even to subtly boast about one's actions. It often overrides the very sound legal advice to remain silent. His re-engagement just speaks volumes about his need for information, perhaps a compulsive desire to understand the scope of the evidence against him, or maybe even a narcissistic inclination to play this cat-and-mouse game with law enforcement. It reveals a personality driven by a need to be informed and perhaps to impress.
There was also a chilling selfie that came to light later, taken by Kohberger in his bathroom about 6 hours after the murders occurred. He was giving a thumbs up in the photo. Well, apparently he had other similar selfies. The timing of this particular one made it especially disturbing for investigators and later, the public. And throughout his interactions with police, Kohberger reportedly showed no hint of remorse or any understanding of the immense pain he had caused. He just maintained this very detached demeanor.
That lack of remorse is a defining characteristic you see in many violent offenders, particularly those displaying psychopathic traits. The selfie. Even if it was a common pose for him, it takes on this deeply unsettling meaning when you view it through the lens of the timeline of the murders. It's really hard to separate the two, a seemingly casual gesture just hours after such horrific acts. It suggests a profound detachment from the reality and consequences of his actions.
Okay, so let's explore the evidence trail further and some other key discoveries that really cemented the case against Kohberger. When investigators searched Kohberger's residences, both his apartment in Pullman, Washington, and his family's home in Pennsylvania, they found some significant items. From his Pullman apartment, they seized possible hair strands, a disposable glove, various receipts, a vacuum cleaner dust container, a fired TV stick, and several items with reddish-brown stains, including a pillow and mattress covers. At his Pennsylvania home, they found another mattress cover and an uncased pillow, also with visible reddish-brown stains, along with a shovel.
Yeah, the presence of those reddish-brown stains on items in both locations is highly suggestive. It indicates a strong probability of them being blood. Those items would have been immediately sent for testing, first for blood, and if positive, then for DNA analysis, which could further connect him forensically to the victims or the crime scene itself. The disposable glove, the vacuum dust container, those also suggest a deliberate attempt to clean up or prevent the transfer of evidence.
And the shovel and the soil evidence found on it is really interesting. Soil found on the shovel, which was confiscated from Kohberger's car, was found to be consistent with soil from the Moscow, Idaho area. The analysis actually excluded Pennsylvania as a likely source. That indicates the shovel was specifically used in or near Moscow. There was also a pollen report done on the soil from the shovel. It contained high amounts of pine pollen, which is common in the Moscow area, but also single pollen grains from plants not naturally distributed in Moscow, like oak and red maple, which are common ornamental species, things people plant in yards. While this might seem a bit contradictory at first glance, it doesn't really negate the Moscow link.
No, exactly. The soil evidence from the shovel is a powerful indirect link to the crime scene area. While the pollen data might add a layer of complexity, maybe suggesting he used the shovel in someone's backyard or a park where ornamental species are planted rather than just out in the untouched wilderness, it doesn't dismantle the primary finding that the shovel likely came into contact with Moscow soil. And this raises a very important question. What was he burying and where? The most common items someone would bury in these circumstances would be the murder weapon, likely that fixed blade knife, and the clothes he wore during the attack. The fact that his phone was off the network between 4:28 a.m. and 4:48 a.m. right after the estimated time of the killings suggests he could have used that brief window to dispose of these crucial items. Somewhere between Moscow and where his phone reconnected, maybe burying them to eliminate forensic evidence.
What's so perplexing, though, and maybe the central enigma of this entire case, is that despite this extensive investigation and all this mounting evidence, law enforcement stated they found zero direct connection. No pictures, no texts, nothing between Kohberger and any of the 4 victims or the surviving roommates. This just makes the motive, the why, even more baffling.
It really does. The absence of a direct link, when you juxtapose it with the extreme brutality and that very personal nature of the knife attack, particularly for Kaylee and Xana, it leaves this significant void in understanding the motive. It defies the typical patterns we see in personal violence and points towards something far more disturbing. When we see such extreme violence with no clear conventional connection, experts often start looking at pathology beyond typical motives. Is this indicative of a deep-seated fantasy life, a rage displacement, or the cold, calculated actions of a psychopath just seeking ultimate control or thrill? Sources we looked at suggest his criminology background could mean he saw this as some kind of perverse academic exercise trying to commit the perfect crime, maybe wanting to prove he could do it and get away with it.
And officially, he had no prior criminal history. While there's been some speculation online about minor crimes, maybe related to a past heroin addiction mentioned in some reports, law enforcement found no evidence to support that Kohberger committed any other murders prior to November 13, 2022. However, they do hold a strong belief that he would have gone on to do so again, given the nature of this crime.
Yeah, the belief that he would have reoffended is a common assessment by behavioral experts when they're confronted with this level of violence, the planning involved, and the apparent lack of a specific, understandable motive. It suggests a deep-seated, perhaps escalating pathology that, if left unchecked, would likely manifest again. And that's a critical factor in determining the risk he posed to the public.
Okay, let's move to the legal battle now, and what turned out to be a very unexpected plea deal in the end. On January 4th, 2023, Kohberger was returned to Idaho. A gag order was immediately issued, severely limiting what information could be shared publicly, mainly to try and ensure a fair trial and prevent witness contamination. On May 17, 2023, he was indicted by a grand jury on all 5 charges, the 4 counts of first-degree murder and the 1 felony burglary charge. This indictment actually bypassed the need for a preliminary hearing, which is usually reserved for cases where the evidence is considered overwhelming. Then on May 22, 2023, Kohberger refused to enter a plea. He chose to stand silent in court, so the judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, which is a standard procedure when a defendant refuses to speak. And on June 26, 2023, prosecutors formally announced they would seek the death penalty. They cited aggravating circumstances, like the crime being especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and demonstrating an utter disregard for human life.
That decision to stand silent, it's a legal strategy, but it also kind of reinforces that image of someone trying to exert control, even within the confines of the legal system, or perhaps just avoiding acknowledging the charges directly. And the pursuit of the death penalty clearly indicated the gravity of the prosecution's case and their strong belief in the overwhelming evidence. They felt it met the high legal threshold for capital punishment, signifying just how horrific the crime was in the eyes of the state.
Then came his alibi, which later completely unraveled. On August 3, 2023, Kohberger's defense team presented an alibi. They claimed he was driving alone late at night, stargazing, somewhere near the Washington-Idaho border, suggesting maybe a place like Walwai Park, which is south of Pullman, west of Moscow. But investigators quickly and definitively debunked this. First, they confirmed the park was actually closed after dark, so he shouldn't have been there anyway. But more critically, NOAA data, which tracks atmospheric conditions, confirmed it was actually overcast with heavy cloud cover during the entire murder window from 4 to 5 a.m., making stargazing absolutely impossible. His phone being turned off during that critical time frame also completely undermined his story. A judge even called the alibi the weakest link in the defense's case. It was a fabrication that just immediately crumbled under scrutiny.
Yeah, the rapid dismantling of that alibi was a huge blow to the defense. It revealed not only a fabrication, but a pretty poorly conceived one at that. It demonstrated his dishonesty and maybe desperation to create some kind of alternative narrative. The specific detail about the cloud cover being verifiable via NOAA data made his stargazing claim not just unlikely, but demonstrably false. That rapid demolition was a massive win for the prosecution, painting him as dishonest and desperate, and significantly weakening any trust the court might have placed in his defense.
Okay, here's where it gets truly pivotal, and for many, quite a surprise. Just days before his trial was set to begin in August 2025, on June 30th, 2025, Kohberger agreed to a plea deal, specifically to avoid the death penalty. Then, on July 2nd, 2025, he formally pleaded guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder and the 1 count of felony burglary. As part of this deal, he waived his right to any future appeals. That guarantees he will remain in prison until he dies. On July 23, 2025, he was formally sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for the burglary charge. He was also assessed $270,000 in fines and restitution, and at the sentencing hearing, Kohberger chose not to speak. He simply stated, "I respectfully decline," offering absolutely no explanation for his actions, no final word to the victims' families.
That plea deal. Well, it prevented what would have been a lengthy, complex, and incredibly emotionally draining trial for everyone involved, but it also meant sacrificing the opportunity for any kind of public explanation from Kohberger himself. From the prosecution's side, accepting life without parole avoids the lengthy, expensive, and often uncertain appeals process that always comes with death penalty cases. It guarantees a conviction and the permanent removal of a dangerous individual from society, without the risk of it being overturned years down the line. For the families, it meant a quicker, definitive legal end to the ordeal. Though for many, as we heard, true closure remained elusive without understanding the why. And for Kohberger, it was likely a pragmatic legal decision simply to avoid the ultimate penalty.
The aftermath of this case has just been incredibly emotional, filled with profound grief and so many lingering unanswered questions. The victim impact statements delivered by family members at the sentencing were just raw, heartbreaking, and searingly honest. They revealed the absolute depths of their pain. Kaylee Goncalves' father directly taunted Kohberger, called him careless, foolish, stupid, and a joke for his criminology background, really highlighting that bitter irony. Her sister, Olivia, addressed him directly, calling him pathetic, a delusional, pathetic, hypochondriac loser, and then declared, and I'm quoting directly here, if you hadn't attacked them in their sleep in the middle of the night like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your finger. Just incredibly raw. Christy Goncalves, Kaylee's mother, told him hell will be waiting and you are officially the property of the state of Idaho.
Those statements, they just reveal the profound, agonizing pain, the rage, the disgust that these families have endured. Their words were directed right at him, hoping for maybe some flicker of acknowledgement or explanation, which tragically never came. It's a powerful, necessary outlet for their grief, and it gives the public a true sense of the devastating, lasting impact of these crimes.
Madison Mogen's stepfather spoke movingly about an endless void left in their hearts and home. He expressed support for the plea deal as a way to protect society from Kohberger, but then in a truly shocking and just profoundly human moment, Xana Kernodle's aunt, Kim Kernodle, stood up and, completely against expectations, offered forgiveness. She even invited him to call her from prison to explain what happened, expressing this desperate need for answers that the legal proceedings just couldn't provide.
Wow. That offer of forgiveness from Kim Kernodle, it's just a testament to the diverse and incredibly complex ways people grapple with unimaginable grief and trauma. It underscores that desperate human need for understanding, and for some, a path toward healing that transcends legal retribution, even from the person who caused such immense suffering. It highlights that true closure isn't always about punishment. Often, it's about comprehension.
Surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, the one who saw the attacker, delivered a powerful statement as well. She called Kohberger a hollow vessel, something less than human, describing how he took the light they carried. Bethany Funk detailed the crippling panic attacks she suffered and how she slept with double-locked doors for nearly a year after the horrific event. Just a testament to the lasting psychological impact.
Absolutely. The long-term psychological impact on the survivors is immense and often really underestimated by the public. Their statements highlight the ripple effect of such a crime. It extends far beyond the immediate victims and their families, deeply affecting everyone who was present or closely connected. It speaks to the enduring trauma.
Despite the conviction, despite the legal finality it brings, the why just remains this enduring mystery right at the heart of the case. Law enforcement themselves admit they don't have a definitive motive. They even said that the why from him may make no sense at all to us. The personal nature often associated with knife attacks usually suggests a connection, yet no one was ever found between Kohberger and the victims. Experts continue to speculate. Was it his twisted fascination with criminology? An attempt to carry out a perfect crime and outsmart law enforcement? Or maybe even an attempt to recreate infamous past crimes like Ted Bundy's attacks on sorority houses? Could it be some kind of displaced rage? Or just the cold actions of a psychopath seeking ultimate control and thrill?
The absence of a clear, understandable motive is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire case. It forces us to confront the possibility of just senseless, unprovoked evil, which is far more terrifying than a crime that has a discernible, albeit dark, reason behind it. It challenges our fundamental human need to understand why something so horrific could happen. And for many, without that answer, true closure just remains elusive.
The King Road house itself, where the attacks happened, was donated to the University of Idaho, and it was controversially demolished on December 28, 2023. This was despite objections from some of the victims' families who viewed it as crucial evidence, maybe a silent witness to the crime. The university stated it was necessary for community healing, a way to remove the physical reminder of the trauma. A memorial garden, the Vandal Healing Garden, opened on campus in 2024 as a place of remembrance. Posthumous degrees were awarded, and scholarships were created in the victims' names, honoring the lives and futures that were so tragically cut short.
Yeah, the demolition of the house is a really complex symbolic act, an attempt to erase the physical reminder of the trauma. However, as some families pointed out, it also removed a piece of the crime's physical history, a silent witness. This decision really highlights the tension between a community's need for healing and a family's desire for every single piece of evidence to be preserved, just in case it holds future answers or maybe further insights down the road.
Bryan Kohberger is currently housed at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution in Kuna. He's isolated for initial assessment, mainly for safety reasons. He'll be under the highest security due to the nature of his crimes and his high-profile status. Interestingly, the Happy Face killer, Keith Jesperson, another notorious serial killer, has publicly stated he wants Kohberger as a cellmate for safety. He cited Oregon's precedent for housing inmates from other states, though apparently Idaho isn't part of that civic pact. It's just a bizarre and unsettling detail that underscores the dark notoriety this case has achieved, and the whereabouts of the murder weapon and the clothes Kohberger wore that night. They remain unknown. Police strongly believe he buried them somewhere.
Right. The ongoing mystery of the weapon and the clothes, despite the conviction, maintains this thread of unfinished business for the investigation. And the offer from another serial killer, while truly bizarre, just underscores the high-profile and dangerous nature of Kohberger as an inmate and the strange subculture that exists within the prison system. The hope, particularly from family members and some experts, is that maybe Kohberger will eventually reveal details from prison, driven perhaps by a desire for attention or to finally tell his story, which is unfortunately a common pattern we see with high-profile offenders over time.
This deep dive into the Idaho murders case, it really reveals the devastating impact on a once peaceful community and 4 vibrant families. It shows the meticulous, tireless work of investigators who refuse to give up. And it leaves us with the chilling enigma of a crime with no apparent motive, just a profound sense of unease. The absence of a clear why continues to haunt this case. It challenges our understanding of human behavior, the depths of evil. Could it truly be a warped fascination with criminology? A desire for a perfect crime? Or just something else entirely, maybe beyond our comprehension?
While legal finality has been achieved, accountability has been delivered through the guilty plea and sentencing, true closure for the families remains agonizingly elusive without understanding the real motive or knowing the whereabouts of all the evidence. It's a powerful reminder that justice, while it provides accountability, doesn't always provide peace. It doesn't always provide all the answers we desperately seek.
This case really compels us to consider the complex interplay between justice, information, and that deep human need for answers, even when those answers may ultimately be beyond our grasp. What stands out most to you about this case? And what lingering questions do you find yourself mulling over after going through all this? We invite you to reflect on that until our next deep dive.